Welcome to the Innovation Ecosystem Podcast. We interview remarkable and thought-provoking guests about innovation, leadership, and change in the world of business. Whether you're an executive or an entrepreneur, our objective is to help you and your organisation create an entrepreneurial culture, become more innovative, and better able to respond to change. Each week, we'll deconstruct world-class performance from the arenas of business, academia, science, and sports. Each week, you can expect key insights, fresh perspectives, and proven tools you can use straight away to make you more successful professionally and personally. With your host, Mark Bidwell.
Hello, this is Mark Bidwell. Welcome to the Innovation Ecosystem Podcast. If this is your first time listening, a very warm welcome. Now, we founded Innovation Ecosystems in order to help individuals and companies become more open to multiple perspectives, and then to deliver these multiple perspectives in a range of formats. As a listener to the podcast, you'll know that we discuss the topics of innovation and change and leadership with world-class performers from the worlds of business, academia, sports, science, and the arts. And over the course of the last 2.5 years, we have been fortunate enough to attract a wide variety of guests onto the show, all of whom have given us the benefits of the unique perspectives that they bring to the world. And this is the third wrap-up episode of Season 4. The first episode was a compilation of previous guests answering the question, what have you changed your mind about recently? And as I explained in the episode, this question gets to the heart of the unconscious biases that we as individuals all suffer from. And many of us go through life seeking confirmatory evidence to reinforce our decisions. Sometimes, however, we are able to overcome this confirmation bias and to change our minds on something big. And from a business point of view, it's key that you're able to overcome the organisational biases like not invented here syndrome, groupthink, the halo effect, stereotyping. This is how you start to look at the market differently, how you start to build your innovation muscles, to innovate around multiple value drivers, to change your perspective and the perspectives of those around you. Now, the second question that I ask guests relates to the personal work habits and routines that they use in order to remain fresh, creative, and consistently to perform at a high level. We are, after all, creatures of habit, and unless we proactively seek out fresh perspectives, we run the very real risk of remaining in our own personal bubbles, surrounded by those who think the same way that we do. Now, the third question I ask guests is, what is your most significant failure or low point? What have you learned from it, and how have you applied that learning? Now, I prefer to learn wherever possible from other people's mistakes, rather than going through the pain associated with learning on my own. There can be no doubt that you're going to encounter unexpected and unwanted outcomes as a result of looking at the world through multiple perspectives, or as a result of changing or adapting your work habits in order to remain fresh and creative. So we all need to be prepared for the inevitable lows, and I believe that what is key is to quickly identify your mistake and to take action. So here are some examples from the trenches about how a few of our highly accomplished guests from Season 4, from the worlds of business, academia, sports and science and the arts, how they've emerged from their lows and have taken that learning forward to create great success. Let's start with the guest of episode 49, board member and advisor to Global 500 companies, Annalisa Giganti.
I'm from the courageous school. I believe that if you want to change the world, you have to take that into consideration. And again, my learning there is what you do next. Don't give up, understand why you're trying to do something and try and make that happen and make that coalition happen so that you can reach those goals. It's not easy. And I think one of my biggest learnings recently was resilience, but it's damn well worth having.
And as you might expect, resilience is a common theme across this podcast, because many of us are trying to do things in our companies that haven't been done before, or that are by definition really hard. And we know from the natural world that resilient ecosystems are more robust and better able to withstand external shocks to the system. And the same is true for the individual. Making your ecosystem more diverse by exposing yourself to fresh perspectives will build your personal resilience. Here's the experience from my guest of episode 50, a man who pretty much lost everything and somehow turned it all into a positive.
Like I lost The girl I thought I was going to marry, my house, went bankrupt, my dream job, got fired. It's been a job I spent a decade trying to get. All of it went away.
So that's author and award-winning journalist and the co-founder and director of research at the Flow Genome Project, Stephen Kotler.
I spent 3 years in bed with Lyme disease, and I was really, really sick. And everything I've ever wanted in my life happened because of that. So I like all the lows have produced the best highs. Yeah. I love a good long low sometimes. Get your ass kicked for a couple of years, and then you get out and you get to slay the dragon again. And that rebirth is kind of invigorating. And if you do it enough times, you start to trust it. You no longer doubt that you can make it back. You're just like, oh yeah, this is what I'm going to do now.
And as I listened to that segment from Stephen Kotler, knowing that he is talking about not only his own personal experience, but that this is a common theme in the lives of the remarkable people he's written about in his books like The Rise of Superman, Stealing Fire and Bold. It's pretty compelling what Stephen's got to say. Now, as Annalisa mentioned earlier, if you want to change the world, you have to take failure and low points into consideration. So if failures and low points are something you've experienced or are experiencing, then you're in good company.
All the best people, if I can use that word, have had ups and downs. There's dark, there's light and shade, and I think that has actually been a wellspring. It looked like disaster, but now looking back, it's probably the reason that we're having this conversation, because ever since, all of my work has somehow been informed by that. When the very thing you're most fearing happens, something amazing comes through. So I think that for me was a real turning point.
Award-winning author, founder of Street Wisdom, and advisor to captains of industry, David Pearl.
It was actually a university where I had what you looked from the outside like a nervous breakdown, but actually, I don't want to be too coy about it, but it was in fact a breakthrough. I was lucky enough to have sort of come apart a bit early on in my career because I was succeeding to the point, I think, to the Wayne Dwyer point. I was succeeding, but feeling very, very unhappy inside. Now, so I think that was the first time that the wheels came off. I appeared to fail, but the turning point there was actually reconnecting with my why, understanding that darkness, what is part of wholeness.
When David and I met, we discussed the incident that he referred to in some detail. And what he initially saw as a breakdown, he subsequently named a breakthrough. And this is a really powerful reminder to me of the importance of the language that we use. And how we label something has a strong bearing on the meaning that we subsequently attach to it. And to be able to turn things around, like the three guests that we've heard from so far, takes real resilience. But it also takes huge amounts of bravery to repeatedly put one's head above the parapet. And bravery was something that my guest and I discussed on episode 66. David Marquet, the captain of the USS Santa Fe from 1999 to 2001, who now works as a leadership consultant and expert and is author of the book Turn Your Ship Around. Now, following his successful naval career, David confided that he wished he'd been a little bit braver over a situation, and the experience that he went through, which was a difficult one, has now had a huge impact on his overall mindset.
What happened to me was later in the Navy, I ended up in the Pentagon, and I was sort of thrust back into a very traditional environment where the people around me were adhering to that leadership definition that you read. They were directing the thoughts, plans of, and actions of others. So I was thrown into a place where, my boss thought it was his job to direct my thoughts. And it felt crappy, and especially since I'd seen this window into another world, and I reacted poorly to it. On the one hand, I don't think I set boundaries well. I didn't protect myself from what I thought was being treated badly, and I feel regretful about that. Mm-hmm. And the other thing is, I kind of flip-flop between being a yes man and just sort of being passive-aggressive, obstinate. Anyway, neither of those were very mature responses. So I think now that I think about my kids and I think about what I went through, and I just really sort of the one thing I regret is anytime when you let yourself be treated badly, we always have an excuse for it. Well, I want to be a team player. Well, I want the next promotion. Well, I'm making so much money here. Mm-hmm. Well, I can't afford to lose my job. And I really think those things take a toll on you more than you might expect. And I would encourage people, if you feel like you're in an environment, it's one of the worst things we can do is have a work that we don't feel valued, that we feel, because we take those toxins home and we create a bad environment for everybody around us. And think hard about that. Do you really need that?
A very honest answer to the question, made all the more poignant since it came hot on the heels of David's successful stint on the submarine. Now, in episode 61, Tyler Page, who's the co-founder of the organic energy company Runa, joined me to discuss his book Fully Alive. And during the interview, Tyler talked about how his low point had a transformative effect on his mindset and his approach to business, thanks to an alternative perspective to leadership offered by a CEO friend of his.
I was at the 1 inch line of getting kicked out of my company a few years ago. And that was an extremely grueling time in my life, but it allowed me to grow in more ways than I ever could have if we hadn't reached that degree of a breaking point. I tell the story pretty vividly and thoroughly in the book, but it was the inflection point for me of acting like scrappy startup entrepreneur to learning as best I could what it meant to be a true leader and a true CEO. And the best piece of advice I got from a friend of mine in the industry was from the CEO of Traditional Medicinals Tea Company, fellow tea industry leader. When I asked him, in your view, Blair, what does it mean to be a CEO? And he said that as a CEO, you have to do 2 things. You have to clear roadblocks and lay down track. That's it. And this idea that as a true leader, your job is to set the course for your team and then remove blocks for them to do their job as best they possibly can. And that sort of seemingly really simple, but just powerful, focused way to think about what leadership was, as opposed to what I was previously doing, which was working 20 hours a day and thinking that I needed to do everything myself, was a really powerful lens to look through and just helped me put the pieces in place in ways that didn't really compute to me in my startup mindset.
Now, there's lots of definitions of leadership out there. At Innovation Ecosystems, we believe that leadership is made up of 3 elements. First, you need to see things as they really are and not worse than they are. This requires you to be able to separate what you observe in the situation from the judgments you make about the situation. And separating observation from judgment isn't easy, and it's a skill that does require some practice to learn. Now, second, you need to be able to see things better than they are. In other words, to create a compelling vision for you and for your team that helps you through the short-term challenges. This requires you to ask fresh questions, to reframe the situation or challenge in very different terms. And third, you need to be able to take action to move yourself towards your vision. And learning from other people's perspectives and leveraging the cognitive diversity within your ecosystem and taking full advantage of all the resources at your disposal, as well as getting really resourceful, this is what's required. And a good example of this in action comes from Warren Berger, the self-proclaimed questionologist and author of the book A More Beautiful Question.
I had a failure with a previous book that didn't do as well as I had hoped and the publisher had hoped, and we had high hopes for it. It was a book about design thinking, and it did okay, and the people who read it liked it, but it, they had thought it was going to do very well, and it just kind of went out there into the world and just kind of quietly went away. And so initially, I was very upset about that, and I think what I initially wanted to do was run away from that situation and just act like the book had never happened, and just move on and not think about it again. And then I realized that there was an element of the book, there was an aspect of the book that people were very interested in and that I might be able to do something with. And that was actually a chapter within the book that had to do with questioning. Okay. So I extracted that chapter and I decided, to think about, could I do my next book based on some of the stuff that was in that chapter, just kind of blow that out into a full book. And it ended up being A More Beautiful Question, and The More Beautiful Question has done quite well. So I think the lesson for me that's in there is don't run away from, or don't be too quick to run away from a failure and to, put it away somewhere where it can never be seen again. Because there may be things within that, there may be seeds of a future success within that failure. There may be things you can learn from that failure or that you can extract from it that are actually quite valuable.
And so I think that was, for me, that was a big lesson.
And because Warren looked closely at the details and reframed the situation and spotted a new opportunity, he was able to turn his failure into something far more positive. Looking closely and spotting details is something that my next guest, unfortunately, knows all about.
So my significant low was that in my last startup, which was sold in August of last year, I didn't pay enough attention to negotiating the terms and conditions of the VC putting money into it. And it caught me out and caught the shareholders out when we came to the point of the exit.
Digital and marketing entrepreneur John Straw.
The lesson is actually to pay a lot more attention to the detail than you think. The difficulty is when you're a startup guy, you're such in rush to actually build product that I think a lot of them count on the fact that you're not going to pay attention to detail. So that was the first thing. And then the second part of that is actually what I saw in the term sheet ended up as being very different in terms of the original and in terms of the actual outcome in terms of the contract. I'm not a great fan of VCs under these circumstances. There are a couple out there which are really great, that are really helpful and really add value. But I'm of the view that a lot of private investors offer significantly more value through their networks and through their knowledge than many VCs do. But I mean, my advice to entrepreneurs is check the contract terms, because there's some really nasty stuff like preference shares in that can really hurt original investors on an exit.
So as we approach the end of this wrap-up season, it's a good opportunity to reflect on what failure is and what it means. And for that, I'll hand over to author, speaker and entrepreneur Frans Johansson for his take on this.
For somebody that views every failure as learning, views every failure as success, as long as you're still in the game to keep trying another time, it's a question that I struggle with simply because of the perspective shift. I don't think that most failures should really be viewed as failures.
So that was Frans Johansson there, putting things in perspective for us. And irrespective of what language we use, whether we call it a failure or a learning opportunity or whatever, we all face challenges, and it's how we deal with them that really matters. And I am frequently confronted by outcomes that I really didn't plan for, and as a result I've got a couple of questions that I regularly ask myself to help me find a way forward. First one is, what's good about this situation? This forces you to reframe and pull out the positive from the situation. Secondly, what am I going to focus on? Again, this creates energy. This creates some kind of forward momentum. And then thirdly, what next? The moving from reflection into taking action. Those three questions I find are great ones to ask oneself when one is facing an outcome one wasn't planning for or a failure. Now, the final clip I've got for you is an example of how these three questions that I ask every guest at the end of the programme, how they have unveiled the more personal side to the interviewee. And we're going to hear now from David Novak, the former CEO and founder of a tremendous business, Yum Brands, and more recently the co-founder of Ogo Lead, with a lesson for life and not just for business.
I think my biggest low probably happened a couple of years ago. Unfortunately, I came down with cancer. I had to go through chemo and radiation and, all that. And, look, I've always been a grateful person, but I think when you get cancer and you have your mortality staring you more directly in the face, I think it's made me feel extremely blessed for the life that I've lived. I never once worried about dying because I think I'm living heaven on earth.
Yeah.
But I think what it did do is it did say, hey, from every day forward, I want to try to make the most out of every day. And so one of the things I do every day, literally, Mark, is I get up every day, I start out and say, okay, what are three things I'm grateful for? And I write them down, and I start getting my mindset into a positive framework. And so that was a very key point where I think I was able to take a lot of what I have and put it into even a fresher, more valuable perspective for the long term.
So gratitude is a very powerful emotion. It's almost impossible to feel anger or regret or extreme sadness and at the same time to feel grateful. And in the world of business, it's a very powerful question to ask. What are you grateful for? What resources do you have access to? What do clients like about you and your business and your product? What near-death experiences have you been through and come out the other side? And instead of complaining about the lack of resources, how can you become more resourceful and take advantage of what you have in front of you? And as I read those questions, I think, yes, these are important considerations that I probably should have spent more time on when I was in Syngenta, but also in the last couple of years as I've been building out this business innovation ecosystems with my partners. Yes, these are very, very useful and powerful questions. Now, in David's extraordinary career as founder and as CEO of Yum Brands, he was able to marshal tremendous resources as he built out the business into the powerhouse that it is today. And as he described just now, he recently learned to tap into a very different type of resource to deal with a very different type of challenge. So a wide range of answers to an important question, the third question of this three-part wrap-up episode to season 4. And this is a question that I encourage you to create some space around and some time to reflect on. And I would love to hear your answers to this question, but also to the previous two questions. What have you changed your mind about recently? And what habits and practices do you have to create to help you become more innovative and more creative? Feel free to email me at mark@innovationecosystem.com. Now let me end with a quote from Winston Churchill, who said that success consists of going from failure to failure without a loss of enthusiasm. And we're very, very excited about the future, but this is the last of the 3 wrap-up episodes of season 4. And we're going to take a break over the summer, and we're going to be busy lining up some more outstanding guests from the worlds of business and academia and sports and the arts and science to ensure that we continue to give you access to fresh, new perspectives to help you address your biggest business challenges. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. This is Mark Bidwell, changing perspectives, one podcast at a time.